My family hijacked my vacation plans for my golden sister and her kids. But this time, I had my own secret escape plan. Reddit, I need some perspective on this. I need advice with my family predicament, which has been accumulating for decades, but it's a long one. Despite growing up in a seemingly typical suburban Massachusetts family, I, 35 degrees Fahrenheit, have always struggled with this particular dynamic. The golden child has always been my older sister, Kate, 42F. Our home has been a monument to Kate's life since I can remember, with every wall adorned with her accomplishments and every discussion focused on her life. My parents were too busy getting ready for Kate's college interviews to buy a cake for my 10th birthday, which I can still clearly recall. They even attempted to pass off Kate's leftover graduation cake, which still had her name on it, as my birthday cake. As I grew up, Kate's accomplishments eclipsed every significant event in my life. Kate had recently been selected to the debate team, so my parents were hardly aware that I had made the honor roll in middle school. Kate had to tour a college campus, so they were unable to attend the ceremony when I won a local painting competition in high school. Knowing that expressing my accomplishments would only elicit a brief, "That's nice, dear," before the topic of Kate was brought up again, I learned to celebrate them in private, in my room. Even our possessions revealed the priorities of our family. The newest technology, stylish clothing, and everything Kate needed for her many extracurricular activities were always in her room. In contrast, my room was filled with hand-me-downs. When I expressed interest in taking music lessons, I had to make do with Kate's abandoned violin, her old clothes, and her old school supplies. I had trouble playing the violin since it was too large for me. We already spent so much on Kate's piano lessons this year, my mother responded in response to my request for a suitably sized one. All the way through high school, the trend persisted. I was forced to use borrowed library books to study while Kate received private instruction for her SATs. My parents took out a loan for her to buy a car for college. They advised me to take the bus when I needed assistance getting about. Kate's needs and desires were at the center of every financial choice, family discussion, and holiday preparation. It was really difficult in college. With the full backing of our parents, Kate had earned her degree from a renowned university. They could only agree to pay half of the tuition at a public school when it was my turn. They clarified, "We're still paying off Kate's student loans. You'll need to figure out the rest on your own." In order to make ends meet, I worked 2 part-time jobs while I was a student, frequently dozing off over my textbooks. Kate, in the meantime, was beginning her career at a position our parents had helped her land through their contacts. 7 years ago, Kate got married, and everything changed, or rather, grew worse. For a whole year, our family's whole attention was on the wedding. For her ideal wedding, which included a designer gown, an opulent location, and a guest list of more than 300, my parents took out another loan. Despite their concerns about the payments, I recall hearing them in the kitchen one evening and their insistence that nothing was too good for Kate's special day. Was there ever any question that she was her maid of honor? I was supposed to coordinate bridal showers, plan a lavish bachelorette party, and manage any minor emergencies that arose. My mother told me, "Don't be selfish, Elizabeth. This is your sister's special time," when I expressed how stressed I was with juggling these obligations while working a full-time job. The twins followed. Our parents were ecstatic when Kate revealed she was expecting twins. Even though they were still repaying the wedding loan, they contributed to the down payment on a home close to them. I witnessed them spend their retirement money, which they claimed they couldn't access when I needed assistance with college, on the day they signed those documents. However, they claimed that this was different. "This is for our grandchildren." Who was the default babysitter, you ask? Yes, I do. It started out as sporadic babysitting. The request, "Elizabeth, could you watch the boys for a few hours?" became a weekly ritual, which was later extended to evenings whenever they had appointments. My parents were in favor of this arrangement, stating, "This is what family does." Kate and her husband Jack, 43 million, assumed that I would always be there to assist them whenever I attempted to object. Even while I adore them, the twins, who are now active 7-year-olds, are draining. The routine is the same every weekend. Kate unexpectedly drops them off at my place, usually with a pretext that she needs me time, or has essential errands to run. The lads run amok, transforming my tiny apartment into a catastrophe. Kate starts crying about how overwhelmed she is when I try to set limits or ask for advance warning, and my parents criticize me for not being supportive. I put in a lot of overtime to establish myself in the marketing industry. I recently received a promotion offer that would involve greater hours and more travel. My mother remarked, "But what about the twins? Your sister needs you here." Kate added, "You can't take that job, Elizabeth. Who will help me with the boys?" when I brought up this topic during a family dinner in the hopes of receiving some congratulations. It seems as though my time, profession, and life are completely irrelevant. My father adds, family should come first, Elizabeth. My mother always responds, your sister has 2 children to look after. You don't know what tired really means. When I tried to explain how overwhelming it all is, Kate accused me of being envious of her life and her kids. She replied, you're just bitter because you're still single, as though my marital status were the only factor that determines my value as a person. After a particularly demanding weekend with the twins, I made the decision to finally treat myself to a beach vacation last month. They had successfully damaged my laptop and left permanent markings on my couch. I knew I needed a vacation. I discovered a small, unpretentious resort in Florida that was ideal for a tranquil retreat. My mother's eyes glowed when I brought it up during our weekly family supper. Oh, that's perfect. We should all go together. The twins would love the beach. Before I could protest, Kate had already begun organizing events. She stated, you can take the boys swimming while Jack and I have some alone time, as though my trip would naturally turn into a time for them to be looked after. In exchange for my assistance with the twins, of course, my parents even offered to upgrade my reservation to a superior resort where they would all stay. Totally disregarding the fact that this was meant to be my vacation, they began organizing activities and outings centered around what the twins would like. I made a choice that would alter everything while I was lying in bed that night. I reserved a separate resort on a quiet little island. I kept the change in plans a secret from everyone. Silently, I began preparing by scheduling time off work, packing my things covertly, and ensuring that my emergency fund was available. Even though I know it's dishonest, I simply couldn't stand it any longer. At the airport, they will be separated from us. While I board my flight to another location, they will be traveling to Florida. I've disabled location sharing and am ready for the inevitable criticism. Yes, I am aware that there will be drama. Yes, I am aware that they will be upset. But I want to prioritize myself for the first time in my life. I've been the dependable sister, the ideal daughter, and the always available aunt for 35 years. To meet my family's expectations, I've given up my social life, my weekends, and my own needs. I was constantly babysitting, so I missed out on dating prospects. I have declined advancements that might conflict with the needs of my family. To be there for them whenever they need me, I've put my personal life on hold. Right now, I'm fleeing a lifetime of being taken advantage of, not just a holiday. I intend to utilize this as a turning point to set clear limits with my family and perhaps even take a complete vacation from them. I'm sick of always making sacrifices, being the family's pillar of support, and being the dependable fallback option. Reddit, what should I do? Am I exaggerating? Is it appropriate for me to want something else for myself, or should I merely follow their plans and accept my place in the family? First update, I appreciate all of your help and guidance. Since my last post, a lot has transpired, and I want to explain how it all turned out. Although everything went according to plan, the day at the airport was more emotionally fraught than I had anticipated. I purposefully chose a different check-in station that was far from where my family would be when I arrived early. I watched everyone come through the glass walls of the terminal, Jack checking their booking details, my parents looking excited, Kate handling the twins, and Kate hauling baggage. I silently went through security for my own flight as soon as they started to head to their check-in counter. As soon as they realized I wasn't at their gate, my phone began to buzz. The bewildered text first appeared. Where are you? Gate B12 is where we are. Then the anxious ones. How are you, Elizabeth? Has something taken place? And lastly, the irate ones. How could you treat us like this? The guys are in tears. Before I boarded my aircraft, I switched off my phone. I experienced a peculiar fusion of liberation and remorse for the first time in years. I had lived with that guilt for the majority of my life. However, freedom? It was exhilarating, and it was new. The crowded tourist destination they were going to was nothing like the little island where my resort was located. Years of strain vanished the instant I set foot on the beach. No twins to babysit, no family problems to handle, no schedule to adhere to. The ocean, me, and complete freedom. In fact, the first 2 days were challenging. The twins would be eating lunch now, or Kate would typically require assistance going to bed at this hour, so I kept checking the time. It's difficult to break decades of indoctrination. However, something changed on the 3rd day. I experimented with things I had always wanted to do but had never had time for. I loved every minute of my silly yet fun surfing lesson. I became friends with a bunch of lone travelers when I enrolled in a yoga class by the beach. I even had a spontaneous dinner date with a fascinating man I met at the resort's coffee shop one evening. Even though it was only a casual supper, it served as a reminder that I could live a life apart from my family. When I eventually turned my phone back on after 5 days, that was the true test. There were dozens of voicemails, more than 300 text messages, and 147 missed calls. Even my mother had called my place of employment to report a family emergency. Fortunately, I had previously told my supervisor that I would be taking a holiday. Some of the voicemails were played for me. My mother's tone changed from one of concern to one of rage to one of manipulation. "Elizabeth, how could you leave your family in such a way? The twins are inconsolable. Did we raise you this way?" Even worse were Kate's messages. "You've ruined everything." The lads are persistent in their request for Aunt Lizzie. "I can't handle meetings by myself, so Jack had to shorten them." However, one message struck a different chord. My father sent it, and he seemed unsure for once. "Elizabeth, please let us know you're safe even though I don't understand what's happening." I had never heard him talk to me without instantly defending Kate or pressuring me to do more before. I texted our family group chat just once. "I'm having a great vacation and am safe. When I get back, I'll get in touch with you. Please give me space." I then turned off the conversation and resumed talking to myself. The following 5 days were life-changing. In addition to reading bedtime stories to the twins, I also read 3 novels. I spoke with other guests without interruption. Every evening, instead of rushing home to assist with baths and sleep, I watched the sunset. In order to digest years' worth of suppressed emotions, I even began journaling. I ate dinner at a little beachside eatery last night. When the elder waitress saw that I was alone, she inquired as to whether I was content with my seclusion. She said something that stuck with me after I gave her a brief explanation of my circumstances. "Family is vital, honey, but not at the expense of your own well-being. Putting yourself first is sometimes the boldest thing you can do." I didn't head straight to my flat when I got home. In order to give myself time to get ready for the inevitable confrontation, I had reserved a hotel room for 2 nights. During this period, I updated my work emergency contacts, changed the locks on my doors, and, above all, put my boundaries in writing. I accidentally liked a coworker's post on social media, which is how my family found out I was back. My mother and Kate arrived at my apartment building in a matter of hours, constantly buzzing my intercom. Across the street, I watched them from the window of my hotel room, feeling oddly cut off from their spectacular performance. I'm going to confront them tomorrow, at a neutral coffee shop, not my residence. I know it won't be simple, but I've prepared what I want to say. When I consider it, my hands tremble. But I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life. And I know I'm doing the right thing in spite of the worry, the guilt, and the drama that will undoubtedly ensue. I'll provide another update following my talk with my family. I'm grateful because Reddit gave me the confidence to take this first step toward independence. Second update. As scheduled, my family and I gathered at the coffee shop, and it was even more heated than I had anticipated. This is what took place. The encounter at the coffee shop began politely enough. I got there early and sat at a corner table, where I could see the front door and the emergency exit, a habit I'd formed from years of expecting family drama. I could hardly grasp my coffee cup because my hands were shaking so much. My parents, Kate, and, surprisingly, Jack all showed up together. I am glad there are no twins. I raised my hand and said what I had practiced before they began their planned speeches. I'm establishing boundaries, and they can't be negotiated. The 2 hours that followed were a masterclass in manipulating emotions. Kate started crying as she described how my absence had traumatized the twins. My mom attempted to instill guilt, following all that we have done for you. Unexpectedly, Jack tried to mediate by offering a compromise in which I would only see the kids every other weekend. For the most part, my dad sat quietly and uneasy. Kate's statement, "You're being selfish. Family means sacrifice," was the pivotal moment. Something broke inside of me. Clearly but calmly, I responded, "Yes, family means sacrifice, but it's supposed to go both ways. When was the last time any of you sacrificed anything for me?" The ensuing hush was deafening. I revealed everything for the first time: the years of being Kate's second best friend, the unfair financial treatment, and the ongoing belief that my life and time were not as valuable as theirs. I then showed them my calendar for the previous year, with every weekend designated for babysitting and every holiday tailored to their requirements. Attempting to interrupt, my mother said, "But that's what aunts do." I responded by saying something I had never before dared to say. "No, that's what paid babysitters do. And Kate, if you need this much help, maybe it's time to consider hiring one." From there, the discussion took a different turn. My mother followed Kate as she rushed out. Remarkably sorry, Jack remained and acknowledged that they had exploited my availability. After remaining silent for a while, my father said, "We never meant to make you feel this way." It was something, but it wasn't an apology. I carried out my strategy when they departed. I relocated to a different area of the city and got a new apartment. Although it's smaller than my previous residence, it's in a safe building with a doorman who has been informed of my predicament. Only my workplace and a select group of close pals now have my updated phone number. Rebuilding my life from scratch was the most difficult aspect, not the relocation or the planning. I had no true hobbies and few close acquaintances because I had spent years being there for my family. I began modestly. I enrolled in pottery lessons, joined a local reading club, and accepted dinner invitations from coworkers that I had previously consistently declined. It was a weird first weekend of real freedom. I did things that were previously unthinkable, including staying up late, going to a farmer's market, and spending hours perusing a bookshop. Kate didn't text me urgently. Mom doesn't make guilt-tripping calls. No requests for last-minute babysitting. My family's response to my relocation was harsh but expected. When my mother attempted to contact me via the company switchboard, they learned that my new job does not allow personal calls during business hours. On one occasion, Kate even visited my office, but security was alerted beforehand. She wrote a tearful letter accusing me of destroying our family. Jack was the source of the unexpected development. He apologized by email for his part in making the scenario possible. At first, Kate objected to him taking the twins to events on the weekends, but she has since come to terms with it. It's a minor yet important modification. My folks are having a hard time adjusting. Dad occasionally texts, usually in an embarrassing attempt to strike up a conversation. Mom fluctuates between angry outbursts and icy quiet. She left a voicemail last week stating, "When you're done with this rebellion, we'll welcome you back." This isn't a phase, and she doesn't get it. My new reality is this. Without regular family interruptions, work has significantly improved. I'm more productive and focused. After noticing the shift, my supervisor assigned me to oversee a significant new project. For the first time in years, I'm also dating casually, but I'm taking it slow. Internally, there has been the biggest shift. I no longer have the ongoing background anxiety that I had for years. I've started exercising frequently, improved my diet, and slept better. According to my therapist, yes, I have finally begun therapy. I am beginning to recuperate from what she refers to as chronic family stress syndrome. The twins sent me a gift last weekend that included handcrafted notes expressing how much they miss me. Even though it was bittersweet, I remained resolute. I carefully wrote them back to let them know that, although I love them, I need some time to look after myself. I had to write it even though Kate is unlikely to read it to them. "There's a lightness about you now. You look years younger," observed an old acquaintance of mine when I ran into her yesterday. She is correct. I feel lighter in spite of the angry texts, the efforts at emotional manipulation, and the guilt that still surfaced. More liberated. Family love shouldn't feel like a prison sentence, I'm discovering. Respect for personal space, acknowledgement of one's own needs, and reciprocal assistance, rather than only one-sided sacrifice, are all components of true love. My new flat will be 1 month old next week. This is the first time I've ever dared to throw a tiny housewarming celebration. Only a few buddies from pottery class, book club, and work. No expectations, no drama, no family, just individuals who embrace me for who I am. I'll provide another update soon. I'm grateful to Reddit for giving me the confidence to make a life shift. Update 3. Completed update. It has been a life-changing 3 months, and I want to describe how it has all come together. The confrontation I had been dreading and anticipating arrived last week. My father unexpectedly came up to my place of employment. His method was distinct from Kate's emotional manipulations or my mother's prior frenzied attempts. When he asked if we could have lunch together, he was composed, even resigned. We got together at a peaceful eatery close to my workplace. For the first time in my life, he truly saw me as his daughter, not as Kate's sister or the family's fallback option. He remarked, "You look healthy," in a startled tone. Happier. The fact that he hadn't seen my discontent for years weighed heavily on the observation that lingered between us. The family had presented him with a proposal. They were prepared to make concessions. If I agreed to take back my place in the family, I could have every other weekend off. He went on to say, they'd even pay for my time with the twins, as though making money off of the commitment would make it more alluring. They still didn't understand, I realized as I looked at him across the table. They did not view my independence as a basic right, but rather as a negotiating chip. "Dad," I replied, "I'm not negotiating my freedom. I'm living it." The conversation that ensued was the most candid one I have ever had with my father. I described how their incessant focus on Kate had impacted me emotionally as much as practically. I told him about memories he had forgotten or had never noticed, dreams disregarded, accomplishments overlooked, and birthdays neglected. His reaction was surprising. He sat for a long time in quiet, not making the normal defense of their decisions. At last, he stated, "We thought we were doing what was best for the family. We never saw how much we were hurting you." Although that wasn't quite an apology, it was the first time I had ever been acknowledged. When he inquired about my new life, that was the true turning point. He paid attention for the first time as I discussed my pottery lessons, my job advancement, and the new acquaintances I had made. Even though it was not flawless, I showed him pictures of a vase I had built. I was shocked by what he said next. "You seem to have built a good life for yourself without us." Both the recognition and the grief in his voice were genuine. We agreed at the end of lunch that nothing would ever be the same again. He gave me my first sincere embrace in years as he bid farewell. "I hope someday we can be part of your life again, but on different terms." That exchange appeared to set off a final round of family strife. After learning of our lunch, my mother began a fresh round of emotional attacks. She has been informing family members that I need an intervention because I'm having a breakdown. Kate has been making passive-aggressive remarks about selfish sisters and broken families on social media because she feels deceived by our father's approval of my decisions. The difference is that none of it has the same impact on me as it formerly did. I've gained a viewpoint from my new life that I didn't have previously. Their actions, in my opinion, are an attempt to keep control over someone who has finally gained their freedom. My new flat seems like home now. My attempts at pottery and pictures of my chosen family, friends who value my independence and respect boundaries, adorn the walls. I've begun teaching my less experienced coworkers at work, ending the vicious loop of toxic support that has long ensnared me. My connection with time has changed the most. I get to spend the weekends any way I want. I've started learning Spanish, joined a local hiking group, and even started dating someone who respects and values my limits. I'm creating a life for the first time that is true to who I am rather than what my family demands of me. The twins sent me a homemade card last Sunday, which was obviously written under supervision. It was filled with regrettable statements about how much they miss their aunt. This would have previously led me into a downward spiral of uncertainty and remorse. Rather, I responded with a tender yet strong letter, stating that although I may not be as involved in their everyday life, my love for them hasn't changed, and that sometimes grown-ups need to look for themselves. According to my therapist, I am exhibiting what she refers to as post-traumatic growth, not merely moving past the past but creating something more robust and wholesome in its stead. She has assisted me in realizing that I am not responsible for resolving the dysfunction in my family. Yesterday was the most recent development. Jack, Kate's husband, contacted me to let me know that my stance has caused changes in their home, not to place blame on me. They've finally recruited part-time help to help with the twins, and he's become a more involved parent. Jack believes it's better for everyone, but Kate is having trouble adjusting. I'm sitting in my home office getting ready for a business trip next week as I write this last update, something I could never have done in my previous life. A frame quotation that speaks to my path is on the wall behind my desk. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is set yourself free. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who supported me and followed my tale. You gave me the confidence to make my own decisions. If you're wondering if people in comparable circumstances are selfish for desiring their own lives, know that you're not. Being free is not selfish. Treating oneself is not unkind. Setting limits is not a sign of treachery. I have no idea how my relationship with my family may develop in the future. Perhaps one day we'll discover a different kind of connection, one based on respect for one another rather than duty. In the interim, I'm concentrating on fostering the life I've built, including my friendships, interests, profession, and, above all, my sense of self. This is not merely a conclusion, it's just the beginning. And I'm looking forward to what comes next for the first time in my life. Forgotten and excluded from my parents' wedding. After 25 years together, I exposed their neglect on social media and revealed the truth. I, 17F, was just forgotten on my parents' wedding day. My parents have been together for approximately 25 years but never married. That's why when my father, 50M, proposed to my mother, 49F, on their anniversary, which they had always celebrated on the day my mother discovered she was pregnant with my eldest sister, despite the fact that they had previously been together, everyone, including me, was overjoyed and celebrated the occasion. This happened way back in February. They moved right into wedding preparations, deciding early on that they would hold a modest affair in Hawaii, with only their closest family and friends for an intimate ceremony. Almost immediately, my mother asked my sister, 25F, to be her maid of honor, and my father asked my brother, 22M, to be his groomsman. I was not surprised nor angered by this. My sister had always been a mommy's girl, and they both enjoyed spending time together shopping and socializing, so they had a strong bond. The same goes for my father and brother. They were often playing football together and messing about with cars. My father even coached my brother's team in middle school. That usually left me as the odd one out. I attempted to participate in my family's interests and groups, but was consistently turned down. Maybe they sensed that my interest in their activities wasn't genuine, or maybe they just didn't mind. Regardless, I was used to being the last and least important member of my family. Mom had a sister, and Dad had a brother. My parents had each other, and my two siblings were closer than they had ever been to me, leaving me feeling lonely and alienated in my own house. During the wedding preparations, it was suggested that I be the flower girl, but my sister thought that role would be more suited to her daughter, 3F, so that proposal was swiftly dropped. Later, my maternal grandmother offered that I read a poem or give a little statement during the ceremony, but both of my parents declined because they wanted the wedding to be low-key and didn't believe a cheesy and sappy speech would match their vision. Those were their exact words. I was still fine with it all, even though it hurt to know that I would be the only family member not in the wedding party or given any role at all on the big day. As the wedding date approached, my parents and siblings were increasingly involved in the arrangements. I observed my mother did not invite me to dress shopping, and whenever they discussed the site or the occasion, I was excluded. So I decided to keep quiet and see if they would understand I wasn't involved in any way, waiting for them to ask me something about the wedding. But that never occurred. The wedding was scheduled 3 weeks ago, toward the end of August. My mother casually asked me the day before their departure whether I had my luggage ready because we couldn't be late at the airport. I honestly informed her that I had not prepared anything. She looked perplexed for a second before snapping at me for not being prepared. I immediately asked her if I had a ticket, and her face turned pale. Yes, they hadn't even purchased my ticket, and I'm not sure if I had a room or any other amenities once there. Even though I was the only member in my family without a steady income, I work as a part-time babysitter. My parents had purchased first-class tickets for my siblings and a couple of other friends who were attending the wedding, but they had overlooked me. My mother urged me not to make a big deal about it and that they could simply find me a low-cost, last-minute ticket from a budget airline. I just said, then what do I even have to wear to the ceremony? She went shopping with Sis months ago for her and all of the other female guests' outfits, but I was not included. That's when my father walked in and ordered me to suck it up, claiming I'd never been a girly girl, so I could wear whatever. I was upset because, even though I'm not the most feminine girl on the earth, I would have liked to be a part of my parents' wedding. It wasn't just the outfit, it was the fact that I had been excluded from almost everything for months. We all got into a fight, with them calling me entitled and accusing me of making myself little on purpose so they would forget about me, as if that was a sufficient reason to ignore their child. They ended up warning me that if I kept this attitude, I might as well skip the entire event. I replied with a defiant fine, and went into my room. The next morning, they all departed for Hawaii without me. The ceremony was tiny, but they all shared numerous photos on Instagram and Facebook about how amazing and magical the entire week was. People noticed that I wasn't in any of the images and began asking my parents why. They responded that, unfortunately, I got COVID before the trip and had to stay home. I made a throwaway because I didn't want to give out my personal information, which is freely accessible on my real account. Unfortunately, this is not a fake. You are the first to bring up the affair theory in my mind, and I'm not sure what to make of it. I hope this is not true. Commenter: the wedding party and other guests received first-class tickets, but their youngest child did not. How is this possible? Then they don't rectify it by buying you a first-class ticket, but rather an economy ticket because it's cheaper. Did you even have accommodations? No dress either, just wear whatever? Now it is your fault that they are careless. Hell no, these parents stink. I believe when she started a cheaper airline, she meant it was more likely that I would arrive on time, as their aircraft was allegedly fully booked. Again, I'm not sure about the accommodations, they made no mention of them. I just know that they all stayed at the same hotel where the ceremony took place. Commenter: instead of fighting for minimum attention from her parents and siblings, she should focus her energies on seeking other sources of fulfillment. I really don't have the strength to do anything these days. I'm starting college later this year and the plan was to live at home because it's not far away, but now I just want to leave. I'm not sure how though. I don't have enough savings or a job right now, and the thought of going out and getting one feels overwhelming. I don't want to drop out, but I want to go somewhere else. I wrote this yesterday because I needed to rant, but I didn't want to start an additional controversy, so it's anonymous. Commenter: if she is PLA, LOAS. In college, she should proceed with the emancipation process. Emancipation will save her a fortune on her schooling, and I guarantee you that her horrible parents did not plan to benefit her in any way. OP: before all of this, I planned to attend college in my hometown. It's a terrific college downtown, and I was overjoyed to be accepted. A couple of my high school buddies are also going there and will live at home. I was saving to buy a car for simpler transportation, and they were going to pay for my tuition and other expenses, but now I simply want to leave this house. Commenter: stay strong. Do not let them get under your skin. Even if you have to find roommates or move in with a friend, depart as soon as you feel secure with your money. There are Facebook groups and other resources for finding roommates, particularly in college locations. OOP: I know that's what I should do. I have a buddy who is moving into a studio apartment near our campus, but I don't have a job right now and don't want to be a burden to her. She and I are close, so I am sure she would invite me to move in with her, but I don't want to be a burden. Also, I don't have a job right now, so I can't pay rent, which is something else I need to work out. Update 1, thank you very much. A few days earlier, I couldn't get out of bed, and my family's comments had convinced me that I was to blame for all that had happened. But after seeing the answers to my article and all of your support, I felt reassured with my acts and thoughts for my family. I'm still dealing with feelings of guilt and melancholy, but anytime I start to spiral, I remember how much this community of strangers has supported me and I try to calm myself down with your comments. Thanks to your opinion and suggestions, I finally decided to call my grandmother and tell her the whole thing. Before I continue, I should clarify that my grandmother, 77F, did not attend the wedding. I stated it in the comments, but I feel compelled to include it here as well. She lives a few states away and has mobility concerns, so she no longer travels. We went to see her around Easter, and she suggested that I read a poem during the wedding, but that was the last time I saw her in person before all of this. She has always been very affectionate to me and has previously chastised my parents for their favoritism, but she is unable to play a more active role in my upbringing because she lives so far away. I'm constantly apprehensive about troubling her because of her age and health. She had a mild stroke a few years ago and is now back to normal, but I'm still concerned. Anyway, I contacted her and explained everything about the wedding, even how my parents didn't even purchase me a ticket to accompany them. She came to the same conclusion as the majority of the commenters. It was simply unthinkable that they had forgotten and done it on purpose. I cried on the phone with her, explaining how I was feeling, how this had been going on forever, how I felt in the aftermath, and most importantly, my need to go. She was really lovely and soothing to me, telling me that I didn't have anything else to worry about because she had my back completely. She told me to take it easy but make plans for the future, and she promised to help me. After that chat, which lasted around 2 hours, I felt better and decided to take her advice. I began working on a plan for the upcoming academic year. I have a friend who is going to rent a studio near our future campus. She has a wonderful relationship with her parents, but she has 5 younger siblings and wants to be more independent, so she opted to move out. I asked if I might live with her temporarily and pay rent as soon as I acquired a job. She immediately agreed and advised me not to worry about rent or anything else until I was in a better situation. We had a good cry together when I told her about my parents' wedding incident. This happened a few days ago and I had planned to post an update at the time. However, my grandmother called my dad and siblings to chastise them on how they were treating me. My brother texted me later with a half-hearted apology, stating he didn't realize I wasn't included and simply assumed I wouldn't enjoy the vacation. He also accused me of uploading the photo solely to cause trouble. My sister, on the other hand, berated me, telling me that I kept making my problems public and blaming them on the family although they were all innocent. My folks have been acting strangely since returning from their trip. They berated me and were outraged at first, but since then, we've just ignored each other. After my grandmother called them, they came into my room and told me that if I wanted to put this whole thing to rest, I needed to stop talking about it. They say it would have all been over if I'd only kept my mouth shut. I requested them to leave my room and contacted my grandmother again to explain what had transpired. She then told me that she and my uncle, my mother's older brother, had bought plane tickets to see me. I was honestly concerned about this because my grandmother's health isn't great, and this level of work is too much for her. I understand how difficult it is for her to get on a plane, so I attempted to discourage her from coming and assured her that everything would be fine. But she refused to listen, telling me that she was overdue for a chat with my parents and wanted to see me. I'm worried about her and feel like I pushed her to take this lengthy, difficult trip because of me. I want nothing more than to hug her right now, yet I'm concerned about her. At the very least, my uncle will accompany her, but I hope she does not overwork herself or that nothing bad happens to her, because that would shatter me. They arrive tomorrow and haven't notified my parents about their vacation. My grandmother begged me to keep it a secret until she arrived. I'm hoping she'll be able to persuade my parents of the error in their ways, or at the very least, assist me in breaking the news to them that I'll be moving out shortly and intend to maintain no contact. I'm concerned about her having to do so much for me and troubling her, but I also admire and love her for everything she does. Update 2. Many people have messaged me and commented on the post, and I haven't had time to answer to anyone until today, so I apologize. You've all been so kind and caring, and it's been genuinely eye-opening and horrifying to realize how many people have experienced similar stories of neglect and abuse. I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to send some kind thoughts to this online stranger. This update will be lengthy, so I apologize in advance. I'll just resume where I left off. My grandmother called to say she was coming here to see me and help me out. I was quite concerned since my grandmother has a difficult time traveling, so taking this trip would put her under a lot of stress, and I felt responsible for her because I was the one who contacted her. She came early Monday morning with my uncle and I went to pick her up at the airport. Not going to lie, it was an extremely powerful and emotional experience. As soon as I saw her, I went to her arms and burst into tears. I'm not sure if I could tell her anything because I was crying so hard. I had so many things to say. Thank you for coming. For being so kind to me, and for having my back. I regret forcing you to take this vacation. I feel terrible at home. I'm not sure if my parents love me, but I know you do. Am I an affair child? When I saw her, I was struck by all of this, as well as remorse and fear. But she hugged me tightly in her arms and assured me that everything would be fine. My uncle hugged us as well. I'm not sure how long we stayed like this, but it must have been a while before my uncle urged us to get going. We got a taxi and proceeded to their hotel. My grandmother had watery eyes, and I could feel her heavy breathing, which terrified me, yet she hugged me and smiled the entire time. She had rented a double room for me to stay with her for those days, and once they were settled in and I was calmer, we sat down, and I poured my heart out to them. Years of neglect, emotional abuse, how horrible I felt after the wedding, but also how I had felt for years. I stated how my parents were attempting to make me feel guilty for everything that had happened, and how terrified I was about my future, but that my number one priority was to get out of the house, even if it meant sacrificing my academics. I informed them that I had made plans to move in with a buddy and was seeking work. I also told them about this post and how several people assumed I was an affair child, and I admitted that I was starting to doubt that myself. It was a lot, and I could tell they were both deeply touched by what I was saying, but they continued to soothe me and make me feel safe enough to open up. After I expressed my anxieties, my grandmother reassured me that I had nothing to worry about and that she would always be there for me. First, she assured me that I was not an affair child. She informed me that both of my parents were overjoyed when my mother became pregnant with me, and she knew that adultery would be a deal breaker for my mother, as she imagined it would be for my father. Apparently, the favoritism started when I was 3 or 4 years old, when my parents were continually complaining about having a young child in the family. They were frustrated because they could transport my older siblings to their activities but not me. I was also quite shy and a bit of a crybaby, which they could not tolerate, setting me apart from my siblings. She told me that my parents had saved more than enough for my college. They're pretty wealthy, so that had never been an issue for me, despite my recent concern that they could take the funds away from me. She told me that if they ever tried to refuse to pay for my education, she would handle it, and she would not allow me to drop out due to financial constraints. She also offered to help me with rent and an allowance so that I could move out. She was quite giving, and I thanked her, but I also mentioned that this experience had been eye-opening. I had no idea how wealthy I had been monetarily my entire life. Despite their flaws, my parents have spoiled me financially. I attended private school, received a huge monthly allowance, and owned a car for years, and they never complained about my expenses. Seeing the experiences presented here made me understand how fortunate I was and how relying on them put me vulnerable to losing everything. I told her that I wanted to be independent, not just from my parents, but from everyone. I feel as if I need to learn to stand on my own. To be honest, writing this and reading the experiences of individuals in truly bad situations makes me feel like a spoiled brat my entire life. My grandmother demanded I take her assistance until I no longer needed it, and I accepted, but I still want to look for work and try to make it on my own. We relaxed at the hotel for a bit because we were all tired from the morning, but in the afternoon, we took a cab to my place. When I stepped through the door, my parents were completely surprised to see my grandmother and uncle with me. Before they could say anything, my grandmother urged me to go pack my basics while they spoke with my parents. I rushed upstairs and overheard my grandmother and uncle berating my parents for everything they had put me through. At first I could hear my parents defending themselves, but they finally quieted down. When I arrived downstairs with 2 suitcases and a backpack containing my most crucial belongings, they were all in the living room. My father turned crimson red and my mother sobbed like a kid. When she spotted me, she stretched her arms toward me, apologizing, but I simply responded, "Save it," in the coldest tone I could conjure. My father told me I didn't have to be a jerk, and both my uncle and grandmother ordered him to stop up. I exited the premises at that point and waited for the cab outside. Back at the motel, my grandmother told me that I would not have to return to them. She informed me that my parents had never questioned my college tuition and had intended to throw me an elaborate birthday party to compensate for the wedding fiasco. They even planned to give me a car as an apology for everything. But my grandmother was having none of it because it was evident to her that they were just attempting to save face. She believed they were making these decisions on the fly, and that a party and a car wouldn't compensate for everything they had put me through. My mother's heart apparently broke when my grandmother informed her that I had even questioned my paternity. My mother burst into tears, but my grandmother informed her that given their actions, what more could they expect after constantly excluding me from family functions since I was a child? My grandmother said she would make sure they made the payments for my school unless I decided to cut relations with them and have her pay till I could pay for myself. I asked her to do that. I felt horrible since I didn't believe it was her obligation, but I really don't want anything else from my parents anymore. Although my grandmother is very well off, she is not as affluent as my parents, but she informed me that everything was okay and that whatever went to me would be deducted from my mother's inheritance. The next day, I went with my buddy, her parents, and my grandmother to inspect the studio where we planned to relocate. When my grandmother arrived, she said, "Absolutely not." I knew from the photographs that the studio was small and dusty, but when we discovered water damage and mildew in the bathroom and kitchen, as well as rust on the old equipment, it was evident that it wasn't livable. I was aware of all of this previously and thought I could deal with it for a time, but what really changed our minds was when the grown-ups pointed out that the studio was street level in a terrible neighborhood, in a building that didn't appear particularly safe. There were bullet holes on the walls, which I had not noticed until my friend's father pointed them out. Grandma and my friend's parents offered to help us find an apartment in a better area and cover the fees. Both my friend and I want to be self-sufficient, but we realize that with potential minimum wage employment in such a high-demand region, we would be unable to get anything better on our own. So the plan is to hunt for a 2-bedroom apartment and my buddy and I will pay what we intended for the studio, with her parents and my grandmother covering the rest. I know I'm still spoiled to anticipate aid from my grandmother, but after seeing the studio in person, I honestly wouldn't have felt secure there. My friend's parents, who were aware of what I was going through, invited me to live with them until we found a suitable apartment, for which I'm really thankful. I've been staying in the motel with Granny since she leaves in a few days. Apparently, my friend, her parents, and my grandmother discussed this before coming to me to ensure I had a safe place to stay until we moved into the apartment, which has yet to be discovered. I teared up as I thanked them, seeing how many people had rallied around me to give assistance. Since then, I've started moving some of my belongings from my parents' house and setting up my space at a friend's. Every time I return, my mother cries and apologizes, and my father has also apologized, but I stay distant and cold toward them. My sister called to say her mother was a wreck and that I was a D-bag for what I had done. Before she could say anything else, I hung up and blocked her. I was about to block my brother as well, but I noticed he had sent me a very long message in which he apologized repeatedly for all he had done and for not comprehending how horribly our parents treated me. He stated he had been doing a lot of self-reflection since Grandma called and realized he was mistaken in presuming I wasn't on the trip because I didn't want to go. He also regretted allowing our parents to exclude me for so many years. I replied briefly, thanking him for his thoughts but stating that I need space and am not ready to accept his apology just yet. I believe he is sincere because he has never been mean to me in the same manner that my sister has, only distant. However, I feel compelled to keep him at a distance for the time being. Keeping in touch with my family feels like the correct thing to do while everything is still so new. Maybe in the future he will show me that he is just as vicious as everyone else, and I will block him. However, as long as he respects my boundaries, I feel better not cutting him off totally. I've also scheduled an appointment with a therapist who specializes in neglected teenagers, and my first preliminary consultation is next week, which will be sponsored by my grandmother. This makes me even more eager to get a job to relieve her of the load, despite the fact that she has repeatedly stated that she is willing to do everything for me. That's where things are right now. I'm not sure if I'll blog again. Maybe after I start classes or move into my apartment, but for now, I'm just trying to spend time with my grandmother and uncle. I'm working on learning to grow and overcoming the feelings of guilt and depression that have haunted me for so long. I'd like to thank this community again for being so nice and helpful to me. To everyone who has messaged me with their own personal stories of being kicked out or having to make it on your own at such a young age, you've made me feel a lot less alone. You've also shown me that things can improve if I work hard for them. I feel lucky because I have such an incredible support system in my grandmother, uncle and buddy, but you're right, reaching out has been the finest move I could have made. Opening out about my sentiments to those that love me, as well as all of my internet pals, has genuinely saved my life. So thank you, I am more appreciative than words can describe. Commenter, I'm curious. When you returned to collect your belongings, what exactly did your folks say? OP. Every time I've gone there, my mother has been crying and saying I'm sorry, again and again, but I haven't talked to her, so she hasn't expressed anything in particular. I also haven't given her a chance. My father has largely remained silent, staring at me whenever I enter and depart. When he apologized, he said something along the lines of, "I'm sorry for everything," without acknowledging any fault on his part. I'm not sure if they're shocked by all that's going on. I'm overwhelmed and haven't had time to digest it all, or if they don't believe they've done anything wrong and are simply acting for grandma. I honestly do not know. Commenter, don't chop off your nose to spite your face when it comes to college money. Your parents are responsible for paying the entire bill. Don't burden yourself with that expense when they can cover it. It's the absolute minimum they can do. OOP, my grandmother has already told me that it is unacceptable for me not to attend college simply because my parents will not pay, and she will not allow me to take out student loans either. I asked if she would co-sign, and she flatly refused, saying she'd rather pay herself than see me upset about money. I will not sacrifice my education because of my parents, but I will take advantage of this opportunity with my grandmother. I'd rather not receive money from my parents because I know they'll hold it over me for the rest of my life, as if I owed them. I'm really fortunate that my grandmother will take care of this, even though I feel I don't deserve her. Commenter. I hope you don't feel bad for coming from a wealthy family. You are not privileged. You appear to be more self-aware than many others from your upbringing. Working and living separately from your family will allow you to explore the world. I honestly don't believe you're a pampered, affluent child. Working for what we need develops character and teaches us a variety of skills, including how to deal with tough people, the value of each hour and dollar earned, collaboration, societal institutions, and more. I'm pleased you have a safety net with your grandmother, and don't listen to anyone who would judge you for it. Many of us live paycheck to paycheck, and I would not want that on anyone just starting out in life. If you ever want to give us an update on how things are doing, I will absolutely read it. Thank you for sharing this terrible period in your life. OOP, I feel more than guilty, angry at my heritage and how ignorant I've been my entire life about my privileges. This self-awareness you stated has only recently come to light for me. When I initially clashed with my parents, I didn't think about money or how I'd support myself. That's always been a given for me, which is wonderful considering I'm still under 18. But after posting here and reading posts from others who have had to deal with the financial ramifications of being neglected, cutting off their family, or leaving home at an early age, I realized how out of touch I had been. Crazy mother-in-law and father-in-law arrested after attempting to trespass on our land and being attacked by bees on the neighbor's property. I reside in a very rural place on a tiny ranch that has been in my family since my grandfather's day. We are around 15 minutes from the nearest little town. When I say small, I actually mean small. My wife and I met by happenstance around 6 years ago when I stopped in town to pick up some groceries. She gave off a tomboy feeling and had recently arrived in the region. She had recently finished school and discovered that she despised city life and wished to return to something more familiar. I will get to that later. I believe she noticed me come in with my pickup and some big equipment and came over to ask what kind of animals I had. She soon came to the point, she was looking for work. She had previous experience with cattle and was new to the region. It's unusual in our area to see single women looking for ranch hand employment, but she claimed she could prove herself, and if I wasn't impressed, I could drive her back to town and drop her off at the bus stop. I was seeking an extra hand for the next few months and had considered asking my neighbor's lads, but I decided to give her a chance. I'm pleased I did since she had a strong work ethic and was proactive about everything on the ranch. I let her remain in a guest room in the main home for the first week until she saved enough money for an apartment. Within 6 months she moved back in and we began dating. 8 months later, we married in a quiet ceremony attended by approximately 20 friends and family members. Her uncle was the only family member that turned up. Her uncle was a tank of a man, even in his old age, and he had a sheep farm in Northern California. During the ceremony, we talked a little about business, and he was pleased to give my wife away. I could tell how the father influenced her work ethic and livestock knowledge. However, there was one topic that my wife disliked discussing: her biological parents. At first, she only mentioned there was bad blood between them, which was great because we didn't know each other well yet. However, once we were engaged, I wanted to learn more about her family and what I was getting into. Her mother, the professor, worked at a college teaching a subject I would most likely never study. My wife portrayed her father, Phil, as a weak man who would do whatever the professor desired. Some of the details she told me about her mother's actions seemed ludicrous and borderline psychotic. For example, in middle school, the professor tried to obtain my wife a girlfriend by claiming she was a lesbian. Now, while my wife is a tomboy, she is not a lesbian. There was also a time when the professor desired to live a natural lifestyle, and begged Phil's brother to allow them to reside on his property. Within a week, the professor despised it and summoned them both back to the city. My wife, on the other hand, adored the farm and felt a connection to both it and her uncle. She left home at 16 and stayed with her uncle until she was 18. The professor repeatedly threatened to drag her back home, but never followed through. After turning 18, my wife went to school, received a 4-year degree, and tried an office job but found it unsatisfactory. She began traveling the bus to rural locations in search of suitable work, and this is how we met. Last year, around March, we began receiving mail addressed to the professor and Phil, including bills, bank statements, and the like. I thought this was unusual, but my wife wanted to throw it all away. I began labeling the letters "returned to sender" and "no such occupant," and returned them to the mailbox. This situation worsened in October. I was tidying up the yard when a brilliant white SUV arrived with a U-Haul trailer attached. My wife looked up and turned pale. "Oh God, it's them," she exclaimed. A plump woman and a slender man, who only distantly resembled her uncle, emerged. The professor instantly approached my wife. "Professor. Well, let me take a look at you. It has been years." The wife: "Mom, what are you doing here?" "Your instructor. The university is doing virtual classes, and with COVID, we figured we could self-isolate at our ranch." She placed an unusual emphasis on the word "our." "You. Excuse me, but this isn't your ranch." "Professor. I'm confident we can resolve the ownership issue. Aren't you going to invite us in?" "Me? Ma'am, you might be my wife's mother, but you're a stranger to me. I would rather not." The professor turned to Phil. "Professor. Make the call." Phil immediately called the cops and began constructing a story about us refusing to let them into the house that they co-owned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was insanely twisted. Fortunately, as I indicated earlier, it is a small town. The sheriff approached, and it was someone I had known for most of my life. The sheriff exemplifies the ethos of a small-town constable. He strives to be a peacemaker and peacekeeper first and foremost. He was also aware that the land had been in my family for 3 generations. "Sheriff, please explain. What's this I hear about you selling half your ranch, Duke?" "Me? I did not. These are my wife's parents, and they believe they have a legal claim to my land." "Professor. Not think? We have lived here since February. With tenant laws that means—" "Sheriff, you know. Funny, I don't remember you in town." That quieted the professor for a moment, but then she delved into her purse and drew out a stack of mail, mostly bills and bank statements with our ranch's address on them. "Professor. Then how do you explain these?" The sheriff took the letters and examined them. "Sheriff, you're welcome. Ma'am, these are all marked "returned to sender." The professor became desperate. "Professor. Please, I have not seen my daughter in years. I just want to make sure she is okay. Surely, you can see that he," she pointed at me, "controls her every move." The sheriff rolled his eyes and approached to speak with my wife and me again. He enjoys resolving interpersonal conflicts, but he had never experienced such craziness. "Sheriff, you might want to invite them in for coffee and chat for a few minutes. They're your parents." "My spouse? If you leave them here, you'll just have to come back in 5 minutes to handle an assault." "Sheriff. You can't mean that. They are your family." "Look, I'm just heading up the road. Invite them in and talk to them." Wife's eyes flashed with rage. Your wife asked, "Does this mean you're going to invite your cousin Aaron to Thanksgiving?" Aaron, the sheriff's cousin, was now serving an 8-year sentence for a variety of felonies. The sheriff's entire family regarded him a source of disgrace. The sheriff's expression changed after he made that statement. He gave my wife a look like, "That bad, huh?" And she simply nodded. The sheriff turned back to face the professor and Phil. Sheriff. Okay, they don't want you here. It's best if you don't come back. The two protested briefly before piling back into the SUV and driving away, with the sheriff following behind to verify they were completely off the property. This was my first meeting with the professor and Phil, and it left a lasting impression. Previously, I described how my wife's mother, the professor, made an unusual attempt to grab control of our property back in October. Things became crazier in December. Keep in mind that we reside in a little village approximately an hour from a major city, so we're not completely isolated. Our ranch is approximately 15 minutes from town via farm road. To give you the lay of the land, I stopped in town to grab some supplies, and by the time I finished packing up the truck, the professor tapped me on the shoulder. This time, she truly acted friendly. I decided to be curt. She literally begged me to listen to her for 5 minutes at the neighborhood cafe. I didn't want to set up a scene on Main Street, so I agreed. We sat down, and the lecturer began speaking. She claimed that my wife was always unsure of who she was, and that the professor and Phil only had her best interests in mind. I didn't want to rant or make charges. I was just waiting for the talk to end. Then she explained, "Your wife saw you coming and wedged herself into my life." I pushed back. I stated that I felt blessed to have her in my life. "Professor, what do you mean blessed?" "Me? Pardon?" "Professor, you just said blessed." I put my head in my hands and wished it was over. Everyone in the cafe stared at the two of us. With her final sentence, the lecturer projected her voice. My response was, "Ma'am, if you're trying to win me over, I suggest you stop using vinegar." She huffed at the phrase but then became friendly again. She reached into her purse and took out a flash drive, laying it on the table between us. "Professor. Okay, that's all the proof you need. Take a peek, and I guarantee you'll discover the truth." I was dying within, not just from shame, but also from the manner my mother-in-law behaved in front of individuals with whom I do business on a regular basis. They would certainly want to know what had transpired. Like I stated, it's a little town. I took the flash drive and fled. I returned to the property, where my wife was waiting. She could tell something had happened in town by the pissed-off expression on my face. I recounted what had happened while holding up the flash drive. My wife was baffled by it. I wasn't about to plug it into a computer we use on a regular basis, so I hunted through a closet for an old Dell laptop that hadn't been turned on in ages. We charged it, turned it on, and blocked the Wi-Fi, my wife's suggestion. We plugged the flash drive in and discovered heaps of PDFs. I'm still not sure how to convey what was within. It looked like a journal, a college article, or a thesis research, with my wife as the topic. I'm not sure what the aim was, or what the professor was testing on her own flesh and blood. It described her first experiences with toy dump trucks as a child, as well as dressed in overalls during their brief stay with her uncle, all of which were chilly, disconnected and, as my wife described it, clinical. My wife was referred to as the subject throughout. It was odd and I'm still unsure what the point was. My wife was outraged by the PDFs and urged us to burn the drive, which we did in the fire pit. That was the last time we heard from the professor, but my wife believes more will come. First and foremost, I want to mention that my wife is doing well. She's amused rather than terrified or furious, yet I can tell when she feels the need to be protected. We placed a new camera directed straight at the gate, which I'm keeping locked. I noted in the comments that we had a FaceTime contact with my wife's uncle last night to see if we could gain any additional information. Her uncle initially provided brief responses, such as, "Yeah, sounds like her," and "sounds about right." He is a don't speak ill of others type of chap. When I told him about the strange play for the ranch, he eventually revealed additional facts. Whoever predicted she'd do this before with his sheep farm gets a gold star. He stated that the professor was a major reason why he and Phil no longer speak. My wife's uncle's sheep farm was part of a much larger property owned by her grandfather. The grandfather had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter relocated to the East Coast and worked in a high-paying executive position. She is nearing retirement and was the oldest of the siblings. When the grandfather passed away, he divided his property into 3 portions. His daughter gave her half to the uncle for nearly nothing because she did not desire rural property and understood her uncle wanted to keep the farm running. The other son, Phil, retained ownership but granted uncle permission to use it. That was until Phil decided to attend an expensive university and sold his portion of the land to uncle for a good price. Uncle was able to maintain all of grandfather's land intact. Phil dated the professor during his undergraduate years and eventually married her. Uncle only heard bits and pieces because Phil only called around Thanksgiving and birthdays. That was it for many years. A few years later, the professor was in what Uncle described as a hipster phase when he learned about the farm. She didn't just show up, Phil asked first. Phil understood rural life, but the professor did not. Uncle portrayed the professor's ideal farm life as waking up to a kale smoothie, digging beets for lunch, and spending the rest of the day in the sun. If you live on a farm or ranch, you know there are plenty of everyday duties. Uncle's farm was largely a sheep farm, but they also had a vegetable garden and a small orchard, which provided enough of work. Uncle went easy on the professor, assigning her only a few tasks such as pruning dead vines in the garden and airing the compost. She took it as an agony. She nearly devastated Uncle's tomato crop that year, forcing him to redo the compost every evening. But the way she grumbled, you'd think she was looking after the entire orchard and all the sheep. She disliked manual labor but was strangely drawn to the concept of a farm. In my experience, joy cannot exist without pain. My wife, on the other hand, took to it right away. She enjoyed checking fences, maintaining the flock, distributing feed and working in the vegetable garden. Uncle mentioned that they had a local butcher who came by on occasion to take a couple lambs, depending on price and demand. The butcher paid the professor a visit once when he was on the farm. The butcher was a black man, which Uncle didn't bother or care about, but the professor made a big deal of welcoming him by shaking his hand and spoke in a sing-song, high-pitched tone. Uncle thought this was weird, so he mentioned it to us. The professor desired the farm but did not want to work it. She wanted to own it on paper and have Uncle and her husband manage it. She even persuaded her husband to fight the sale he had made with Uncle a few years before, in order to gain partial ownership. Of course, this went nowhere. Uncle had to pay a lawyer, but the case never reached court. After that, Uncle and the rest of the family refused to speak with Phil. I was curious, so I asked Uncle why the professor yelled at me when I stated I was blessed to have my wife. He chuckled and added, "Really kicked that hornet's nest, huh?" Then he mentioned that the first night the professor stayed with Uncle, he and his wife cooked dinner. When they sat at the table, Uncle was about to say grace. My wife flushed when he mentioned this. Apparently, this is a humiliating memory for her. The lecturer exclaimed, "This family doesn't say grace." Uncle shrugged. He wanted to be flexible and told her she didn't have to participate if she didn't want to. She tried to push things even farther, demanding that as long as she was in that house, no one would say grace. Uncle stated that this was the first time he had been disrespectful to the professor, and that no guest would tell him what he could and could not do in his own home. I'm not sure why the lecturer believed that individuals in rural areas did not attend church. After hearing about the sheep farm, I will contact a lawyer. We'll see how it goes. I believe I mentioned it in a previous piece, but we live in a tiny town, and my wacky mother-in-law, the professor, has already caused a stir in only 2 appearances, one at our house and another in town. What I appreciate about small communities is that everyone feels like family and looks out for one another. What I detest about small communities is how quickly gossip spread. The sheriff from my initial post is completely on our side. Dan has done his best to explain to everybody who asks that it is not their business. The difficulty is between my wife and me. We attempted to be social in town before COVID. We attended church regularly and took part in potlucks. I hired my neighbor's boys to help out on the ranch numerous times over the summer. We enjoy being social. When the professor created a disturbance at the cafe in December, I could feel the town's attention on me. Nobody knows what happened, but they want to. I can feel it. They are too polite to ask, yet not enough to avoid whispering. It's getting to us. The sheriff informed me that last week, the local pastor directly asked him what was going on with my wife and her mother. The sheriff stated that the pastor believed there should be an easy answer. Sheriff caught it in the bud. My wife's statements had a greater impact than we anticipated. The sheriff stated that unless we requested assistance, it was neither his nor the pastor's responsibility. He did remark to the pastor, and I recall how the sheriff put it to me, "They're part of your flock. She," referring to the professor, "is the wolf. Become an excellent shepherd." Despite this, I continue to receive strange looks whenever I am in town. Scenes like the one in December are unusual around here. Any advice? So it eventually occurred. The professor and Phil are in jail. The circumstances are also unusual, but we are relieved that a resolution has been reached. 2 nights ago, the sheriff called us in the middle of the day. My wife picked up, and after a few minutes of conversation, she began chuckling. She told me what the sheriff said. It appears the professor and Phil decided to try to sneak onto our property. Why? I can't predict this woman. The professor decided that instead of attempting to enter the ranch via the farm road, which we can see from our house, she and Phil would park a bit further away and enter our land via a neighbor's property. My neighbor to the east owns a small orchard and is a hobby beekeeper. He doesn't receive much honey each year, but what he does get he shares or sells at the farmer's market. The bees had just begun to pollinate the field chickweed here. The professor evidently stumbled upon his bee boxes, actually bumping into one. The bees start swarming her, and either she or Phil become enraged and kick one of the boxes over. My neighbor has a sensor perimeter around his bee boxes in case of bears, and it went off. He dashed to his bee boxes and saw two middle-aged people batting at bees and yelling. My neighbor phoned the authorities, and after about 20 minutes of attempting to burn and hose the bees down, he swiftly filed charges for the destruction of his bee box and trespassing. Apparently, there are additional charges for interrupting and ruining a farm's agricultural capabilities since his bees pollinate his orchard. They left. Both were apparently coated in stings and are currently in county jail. The sheriff stated that the professor is attempting to argue that the area where the bee boxes are located is a public easement and that she has legal access to it. For the time being, however, it is over. Everyone here breathes a great sigh of relief.